Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to the organisers. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and particularly to be in Paris for a couple of days. It's been fantastic. So I'm Andy Sweetman, and you can see from the title there, I work in the Centre for Chemicals Management, which is part of the Lancaster Environment Centre at Lancaster University. So we are one of 5 centres across the Lancaster Environment Centre. Obviously, you can guess from our name, we are interested in all aspects of chemicals, from chemical manufacture to chemical use in products, to its potential environmental fate and behaviour, accumulation of food chains, all the way through to potential exposure to humans or wildlife. The ideas of the centres was to try and be a little bit more proactive with our research and engage more with, particularly in the UK, with the SME market, and to try and encourage joint collaborative initiatives. The other centres we have in the Environment Centre look at sustainable use of water, sustainable agriculture, energy, and a new and emerging one looking at the subject of informatics. We are very lucky at Lancaster University that we have a government research laboratory that's co-located, and we try to very much align our academic research, our applied research, with the government laboratory, which was one of the reasons why it was put there in the first place. And it's starting to prove very, very beneficial. Just to give you some ideas of the sort of things we do in the Chemicals Centre. Primarily we are an environmental analytical centre, particularly focusing on, in my area, on organics, but we also have lots of work going on in organics as well. So we have all the necessary instrumentation that you would expect in the trace organics lab, GCs, mass specs, LCs, etc. So that's what we specialise in, developing new methods, looking for new trace organics, emerging pollutants, etc., in all aspects of the environment, whether it be air, water, soil, sediment, biota, etc. The thing I'm going to talk a little bit about today is developing new sampling techniques. So we have all the laboratory work, but it's about being able to get out in the environment, take representative samples, maybe doing large spatial surveys, that sort of thing, using both active and passive sampling techniques. Something that I'm personally involved in, the next 2 bullet points, that's looking at source inventories. So we do a lot of work for the UK government, looking at how chemicals are manufactured and used and the potential release into the environment, and then trying to develop multimedia fate models that can predict how these chemicals may behave, where they're likely to go, what sort of effects they're likely to have. That means you can then tie that in with exposure calculations and obviously then look at potential risks to either the human health or the environment. A couple of other parts down here. We're also involved in REACH, which I'll explain a little bit later. We have a co-located company that is a REACH consultancy, but we have a joint program where, from the university side, we offer postgraduate certificate in REACH registration, so it's kind of a basic training course for those involved in the tricky process of registering chemicals under REACH. We also do quite a bit of work looking at PBT assessment, so these are identifying chemicals that are persistent, bioaccumulative and toxic, which ties in with much of the work we've done with our analytical method development and our sampling methods. We're also doing limited work on looking at SVHCs, particularly SVHCs in more trickier products and arenas rather than the more routine. This is looking for things like plasticizers in difficult materials, looking at ways of extracting them out, making a quick and rapid assessment. So just to give you a few pictures of our labs, these are the typical things you will see in a trace organic lab, from sample preparation through to different extraction methods using, we've got a high resolution GCMS up there and a number of benchtop instruments, both LC and GC. So we can develop methods for a very wide range of trace organics in a whole range of different matrices. So one of our sort of cornerstones of the work we've done for many years is developing methods, both sampling and analysis for trace organics in air. We have worked for the Department of Environment in the UK since the early 90s, looking at trace organics in the UK atmosphere. So these are things like dioxins and PCBs. So we now have very long time trend data, second longest time trend data in the world. It's a very useful data set. It can look at the success or otherwise of source reduction. So when the UK government and other governments sign up to things like the Stockholm Convention, we can actually demonstrate that these are effective regulatory instruments. This is actually one of the active air samplers we have on the roof of the DEFRA building in centre of London. You can see the Palace of Westminster and the London Eye just behind. We've also done quite a lot of work looking at occupational exposure to things like dioxins, PCBs and other industrial chemicals. So we have worked with the UK Health and Safety Executive to develop new methods for looking at these chemicals in industrial settings. Perhaps the most exciting area we've developed with others is to develop passive sampling techniques. So whereas these types of samplers require power, a certain amount of expense to buy the equipment, trained personnel to run them, these things are very much simpler. They rely on diffusive uptake, and you can deploy them just about anywhere. So whereas we have, say in the UK, only 6 sites, quite an expensive network to run, in Europe we have been able to do surveys with 100, 150 samplers, all sampling at once in different locations. All the samplers have been prepared by one lab, analysed by one lab, so it's a very consistent data set. And this is something that we've had visitors from China that have come over and got quite excited about the whole idea, have gone back and done other large-scale surveys. So it's really starting to take off. And these types of samplers are now part of a global atmospheric monitoring program. So they have a number of sites across the globe, from South Pole, North Pole, as far as east and west as you like, and it's become a sort of global monitoring program supported by UNEP to try and look at the effectiveness of things like the Stockholm Convention on reducing persistent organic pollutants in the environment. Closer to home, we have done some work with our primary regulatory authority, the Environment Agency, looking at developing passive samplers again, but passive samplers that actually give you directional information. So this is our kind of latest design. It's a rotational sampler. So with a wind vane at the back, it will rotate, sampling always into the wind. The internal parts of the sampler, the most important part is this carousel in the middle, and that has a number of sectors that will align depending on which wind direction the wind is coming from. And you can fill the sample collection wells, which are these little pockets here, with a whole range of different media depending on what you're trying to collect. So we've initially set up the sample for looking at things like nitrous oxides. We're now looking at trying to capture particles. We've got developments for ammonia. We've got ideas of looking for radionuclides as well. So it's a potentially very versatile sampler. It's been developed, as I say, with the Environment Agency. We have gone through the process of putting it through various patent applications, and we're now going to the process of trying to develop it as a sampler that can be used to give some regulatory guidance and information around particular point source locations. We're doing a lot of work around steelworks at the moment, so steelworks that create a large amount of dust during their industrial processes, but also just moving raw materials around. Also, fugitive releases coming from the process as well. These are traditionally very hard types of sources to quantify. If you're a regulatory agency, of course, you not only need to quantify these sources, but identify exactly where they're coming from, in amongst usually a large number of other diffuse sources of chemical. So the idea is that we place a number of these samplers around the site, both upwind and downwind, and with the directional information, we're able to get some idea of the source strength that's contributing to the downwind signal. This was an exposed sample quite recently, where we have small amounts of foam packing in the sample cells, and they collect particles as the air passes through. And you can see that just visually that this particular wind sector has got the biggest loading. We actually use a magnetics device to actually quantify the particle count strength as well as just looking gravimetrically, etc. In the water sphere, we're also looking at developing passive samplers. This is something called a diffusive gradient sampler. It's been used a lot for heavy metals. It's partly developed at Lancaster University. And we're now developing the sampler. All we do really is we just change the different diffusive gels inside the sampling device and the resins, which is the capture part of the device. We can change the properties of those to able to sample for a whole range of different chemicals. Currently, we're looking at pharmaceuticals, antibiotics in particular. And we've been able to use them to do things like surveys of sewage treatment plants. So we can take a series of grab samples, run the passive samplers as small devices just sit at the end of a rope into the tank. And we're starting to get very encouraging comparative results in this type of very complex environments to say for a range of antibiotics. We're also applying it to lower concentrations in rivers. Again, we're getting quite encouraging results. So this would be a very cheap and easy to deploy and potentially quite a sensitive sampling technique for a whole range of important emerging pollutants. The other thing we're very much involved in the sort of analytical sphere is to be able to develop bespoke analytical methods. The Royal Navy came to us a little while ago looking at trying to profile some of the ships they're looking at decommissioning. So we were able to develop methods for looking at PCBs and some of their waste electrical equipment to decide whether the actual equipment did contain PCBs and therefore would need to be waste incinerated, or other more recent refits didn't contain PCBs and therefore could just be put into landfill. They came to us because we were able to put the time and energy and develop bespoke methods for these very complex materials. These are the types of funders that we commonly work for. So we've got the UK research councils in Europe, the regulators in the UK, DEFRA and the Environment Agency, but increasingly more and more chemical companies and agrochemical companies that have use for our services. So I just wanted to finish to say that because of the sort of work we've been doing, we have had an active interest in REACH. In 2007, this chap here, Jonathan Lutwich, along with some members from the university, set up the REACH Centre, which is a consultancy based on campus, and it's turning into quite a big team now. They offer a whole range of regulatory consultancy advice through from substance characterization, help with registration, CEF work and that sort of thing. They're starting to develop software tools to keep eye on the SVHC's list and SIN list and other important lists of potentially interesting chemicals. The one thing I wanted to end up with is that that's obviously, they are now a private company. They run quite separate from the university. But we have a number of initiatives that the university and the REACH Centre collaborate on. That's partly on the testing, so they come to us with maybe some more tricky analysis for some of the SVHCs in products that their customers are interested in. Also work on VOCs, that's the sort of thing we can do. But also, we have developed this postgraduate certificate in REACH. It's one of the few I think you can participate in Europe. It's a fairly industry-friendly 3-module approach. So 3 modules or 3 days, and you get sort of basic grounding in the whole process of going through REACH registration, from deciding what your products you've got to register, what your needs are, how to negotiate in CEFs, legal aspects, the basics of risk assessment, putting together dossiers, etc. So you get the basic groundings in 9 days of training at the university. The one area that we're currently also trying to develop is looking at how nanomaterials may be brought into the REACH regulations and other regulations, and the challenges that nanotechnologies may bring to us. And I will finish there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.